Hello, my name is Tendai Manombo, and this is Real Talk. On the 11th of July, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development joined other African countries in commemorating the African Union Anti-Corruption Day under the theme Strategies and Mechanisms for Transparent Management of COVID-19 Funds. Today, we're joined by Tamika Halwindi from Transparency International Zambia and Fadzai Jekemu from Transparency International Zimbabwe. And both ladies are going to help us understand the issue of corruption in the context of the two countries and in the context of Africa as a whole. Please stay tuned for more. Thank you so much for joining us, Tamika. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Tamika, please just help us understand a few things. Could you please just give a brief background of the African Union Anti-Corruption Day and why it is so important? Why is there so much noise around it?
Yeah, I think interesting question. Everyone interprets the African Anti-Corruption Day in their own way. And I think some of the debate has been, why do we need such a day? Is it as a negative connotation? But I think when you kind of read the background of this day, it's basically to recognize that for a while, corruption has been an issue in our governance. And it's basically a day where we can, in a sense, reflect, but also kind of think about where we are with regards to tackling this corruption in our different countries and governance systems, and to see and assess if we are making any progress, to see where changes can be made. So for me, I would like to think of it as a day to and of how far we have gone in terms of tackling corruption in Africa and in our various countries.
So it's just a moment to reflect really on how far we've gone, what we've done so far, and what can be done in the future to improve on the situation.
Exactly. It sounds like such a simple thing to do, but having that designated day where we collectively reflect and have conversations about corruption in Africa, realistic conversations, I think that it's very important because most of the time, perhaps, civil society organizations were pulling in different ways, but having a designated day to kind of reflect, have discussions, and kind of just take stock of how far along we've come with regards to the fight against corruption.
Oh, that's very important. That truly is important. I like that you said that it's an opportunity to have realistic conversations, because very often people do have the conversations, but it's all pipe dreams and hardly any work is done. So it's important to have these realistic conversations and set targets that can be attained, I think. Now, the media has been awash with cases of abuse of resources, both financial and material, earmarked for the fight against COVID-19. Any two case studies you'd want to share with the viewers? Right. So I was talking about.
For us.
Oh, okay. I just needed to find out about before we dropped there. Are there any two case studies that you want to share with the viewers about the abuse of financial aid and material stuff that was set aside for COVID-19, the relief of COVID-19?
Yes, sure. I think that for Zambia, it's not a unique case, unfortunately, with regards to the fight against COVID and how we saw corruption coming in. So for Zambia, I think there were three instances, at least for me, working with Transparency in Zambia around COVID-19 anti-corruption programming. I think the first was when COVID hit, and we saw some of them, I suppose, well-meaning institutions and individuals willing to give donations, funds, resources to fight COVID-19. But unfortunately, there was no transparent mechanisms, and at the end of the day, it was difficult for government to account for those donations that they received. And this was revealed in the first Auditor General's report on COVID-19 donations. After that, we saw that the government now had to use public resources because COVID was not going away at that point.
Yes.
And so we had another Auditor General's report which highlights massive corruption, basically, of COVID-19 funds, which was demonstrated by wastage, unaccounted for stores, misprocurement, abuse of resources. And so those have been, I think, the two milestones with regards to the management of COVID in Zambia. But the other case, which was in a sense an outlier, had to deal with vaccines, when in last year it was revealed that there was a politically exposed person who tried to bring into the country COVID-19 vaccines that were not even approved by the World Health Organization.
I remember reading about that. It was very alarming.
It was very alarming because, I mean, speculation is that this story only came to light because we had a change in administration. Had that change not occurred, I don't know if we would have been able to catch wind of the story, because the vaccines were only destroyed if it's not after or close to the election. So for us, those are kind of like three cases that we can point to see how corruption has interacted, unfortunately, with the fight against COVID-19.
Right. Okay. So what do these cases reflect on the state of public finance management in Africa as a whole?
I think as a whole, we have had issues with public finance management, right? If we look at our different countries, in Zambia's case, if you look at the Auditor General's report, it has been like a symptom, to see these issues reflected in Auditor General's reports into how public finances and funds and resources are managed. But COVID-19 brought a new dimension to it, because you kind of saw the disregard and the scale of corruption and abuse of public resources, right? It's like people did not have remorse. Like, they didn't care that this is a pandemic and people might die. It was just an opportunity to do the same thing, but at a greater scale, because COVID-19 required an emergency response. And so sometimes decision makers didn't have to go through the scrutiny processes that they usually have to do, and just do things. In the urgent response, unfortunately, some dodgy individuals took advantage of that. So it kind of just brought to light how misuse of public resources, if it becomes known and goes unchecked, can actually cause harm to citizens and service delivery, and actually mean a cost of life for some people. So it was really disturbing and alarming, even just reflecting on it.
Yeah, Shane, that it is quite sad that the disregard to the value of a human life has reached a level that people actually died because some people in governance or in like office bearers just decided to pocket the money, to be greedy and to exhibit their greed in such an instance. So that's really sad. So in your view, what specific actions should African leaders undertake to address corruption?
That is a very complex question in terms of offering solutions, because we've been faced with this corruption problem for a long time. And then unfortunately, with the pandemic, and maybe you agree with me, Tendai, we saw that it's, in a sense, it's not only an African problem. I mean, we saw issues to do with vaccine contracts and how countries who could afford were getting vaccines, and how that was a very obscure process as well. So unfortunately, COVID-19 just showed us, corruption is much broader than we thought it would. But in terms of some solutions going forward and learning from what has happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, definitely we cannot, I think, overstate the need to have access to information laws
Yes.
in our countries. I
Oh,
mean, there are
yes.
always going to be dodgy individuals, right? But most countries who've been able to effectively fight corruption and highlight some of the COVID-19 abuse, mismanagement, or corruption, do have access to information laws. Unfortunately, in Zambia, that is something that we don't have, and it's something that civil society is still advocating for, to ensure that we have information to monitor as citizens, as civil society, and follow up and bring some of these things to light. So I think number one is definitely access to information laws. The second, I think, is we need to see more transparency in procurement, right? We saw how procurement was used or misused to do dodgy dealings, basically, with regards to public funds that are used for procurement and contracting. Also, I think that there needs to be a discussion around complaints mechanisms and whistleblowers and how they contribute to ensuring transparency and accountability, because we do have people who might be working for some of these public institutions who see this abuse or corruption going on, and they would want to report, but then there are no safe mechanisms for that to do, for them to do that.
There's
So
always that concern.
definitely greater, yes, so definitely greater protection for whistleblowers, as well as people who want to kind of highlight some of the issues that are going on with regards to the public sector. So I think that those three, they're not the magic bullet per se, but they would definitely go a long way, because I think that COVID-19 also showed that citizens also have a role to play in terms of ensuring governance, fighting corruption. So if we have information, we have a transparent way that we can monitor how our public funds are being used for procurement and contracting, and we feel safe to blow the whistle, I think it would go a long way in terms of accountability and reducing corruption in the use of public funds and resources.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that's a lot of work for the leaders to do, and just help the situation that seems to be exacerbating. But then, in your view, in this week that civil society is concentrating on corruption, would you say the situation is improving or worsening, or it has remained the same?
Very difficult, very difficult question, and I will answer it. I suppose the way I see it personally, I don't know. It's difficult to tell, because some of this corruption was hidden. But with the coming, social media, I mean, we see the stories happening in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in the US. So it's like we have more information. So whether this was happening for a long time and it was hidden, or it has now just come to the fore, or we've seen that there's an increase in corruption, I don't know. I wouldn't say. But there's also been, I suppose, an increasing trend, at least for my country, and from what I hear from the generation that was older than me, in terms of the scale of corruption, right? Before it was petty corruption, a bribe here, a bribe there, but now we are seeing corruption in the political atmosphere when it comes to political parties. We're seeing corruption in the use of public resources to a height that is unexplainable, and you would wonder, why does someone need all this money? So I think that the scale of corruption may have also increased, which means that there is more involved in corruption, and so it makes it seem like it's getting worse. But I think that definitely we need to, like I said, reflect and see what we can do to, in a sense, reduce corruption, because in as much as the networks for corrupt individuals and criminals have increased, and the ways that they can do what they do have kind of magnified, the same can be said for civil society and citizens. So it's not a yes/no answer, but it's definitely the type of corruption that is very worrying and alarming, especially when you read a news headline here and there. It's worrying corruption, I think, on a grander scale than previously.
I would say it's a good thing that the depth, the gravity of it has been unearthed. So we don't know if it's been going on for so long. We don't know how long it's gone on for. But the fact that it has come to light, at least now we know there's a problem that needs to be solved, as opposed to being completely ignorant and oblivious to the fact that public funds are being misappropriated. That is a bigger problem. So I guess in my view, there's an improvement in the sense that we now know where the problem is. So it's now an issue of plugging the bleed, like stopping the bleed.
Yes, definitely. I think you've put it in a very optimistic light, right?
We have to look at the bright side.
Yes, definitely. So we can pinpoint and say, okay, this is where the issue is. What can we do about it? How do we address that issue? Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Zambia, Tamika. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Welcome to our second segment, and thank you so much for staying tuned. We were just talking to Tamika from Transparency International Zambia, and she was giving us a Zambian perspective of the African Union Anti-Corruption Day, where the whole of Africa is just commemorating this important topic of corruption. And now in this segment, we have Fadzai from Transparency International Zimbabwe. She's a programs officer there, and she's just going to help us get a Zimbabwean perspective of the issue of corruption. Welcome so much. Welcome to our show, Fadzai.
Thank you, Tendai.
Now, Fadzai, Zimbabwe joined the rest of Africa in the commemoration of this day, of the Anti-Corruption Day, right? Why is it so important to Zimbabwe?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. My response will begin from saying that there's the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, in which Zimbabwe is a state party, and also it is signed and ratified this, and this is at an international level. So coming closer to home, the African Union states decided that they also need to have their own protocol or convention which speaks to preventing and combating corruption. And Zimbabwe is also a signatory and member state to that. It also signed and ratified the AU protocol. So as we are commemorating the African Union Anti-Corruption Day, it's important for Zimbabwe because it gives the African head of states, the African countries in general, a chance to then take stock of the anti-corruption measures within their countries, and also to learn best practices from different countries. And also the other thing is, given the theme for this year, which is the one speaking on the strategies and mechanisms to minimize corruption in the management of COVID-19 funds, Zimbabwe was equally affected with this. So this is a time for the African head of states to then put their heads together and say that if we are to have another pandemic, how best can we mitigate the losses that we got from corruption in the COVID-19 pandemic? And also it's a chance for the African head of states, including Zimbabwe, to realize that the 2063 agenda will not be realized if corruption remains rampant in Africa.
All right. So in your view, what is the nature of public finance management in Zimbabwe? And what's the state?
Okay, that's a broad question. Public finance management has got different aspects. It has got the public expenditure, it has got the public debt management, it has also the financial management, and also public procurement. So I think I'll focus my response in line with the Africa Union strategy for Africa Union Anti-Corruption Day strategy for this year. There's a lot of procurement which took place. And this made us see that there are a lot of loopholes within the public finance management sector. We see that the Public Accounts Committee for the Parliament called upon the different ministerial personnel, and also called upon the agencies which are responsible for managing and allocating COVID-19 funds. And they didn't come forward to give information to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on the Public Accounts Committee. So what we see is a lot of diversion of funds, and also diversion from the constitutional mandate given under Section 298, which speaks of transparent and accountable management of funds, as well as the provisions within the Public Finance Management Act.
All right. What are the implications of corruption to the odd Zimbabwean?
Okay, there's a detachment in having a conversation where an old lady in Bari, for example, to tell them that the impact or the effects of corruption, let's say procurement corruption that happens at a high level, grand political corruption, has an effect on you. So, for example, we need to deepen that conversation to then take an ordinary citizen and say, do you know that this abuse of funds that happened, for example, in the COVID-19 Transcape scandal, that affects your access or right to health, for example? So corruption also is not a victimless crime. It's important to then show the victims of corruption, especially the poor and the vulnerable members of our society, to say that the reason why you don't have clean water, access to clean water, is because of corruption which is happening at a high level. Or the reason why you don't have access to education, it's because the funds are being diverted for private use by those who are assigned to manage the funds, the public funds.
All right. Talking about that detachment, I just want to dwell on it a little bit, just go deeper. You see, they're the perpetrators and then they're the victims. How then do we bring people to, how do we remove this detachment and actually conscientize people that, okay, you are affected this way? What steps need to be taken to just bridge that gap?
Okay, I understand institutions like the ZimCode have got campaigns that they're doing. The How Far campaign, for example, it is taking the citizen and putting them as the victims of corruption, and also asking the government on how far have we gone with ABC, the promises that were made or the obligations that the state has on the citizens. So conscientizing the community is one way of doing it, and also engaging the policymakers, the parliamentarians whom we chose to represent us in parliament. So they should be strengthened, their representative role should be strengthened, to say that as much as they are the legislature, they go to parliament, get information, ask key questions to the ministers, and also they should now go back to the communities and give them answers and responses to the issues of corruption that are affecting them as communities.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. We're just going to take another quick break and then we'll be back after this.
Thank you.
Welcome to our third and final segment, and thank you so much. Thank you once again for staying tuned. Here we're talking about the African Union Anti-Corruption Day 2022, and we're here with Fadzai from Transparency International Zimbabwe. And Fadzai, there were media reports on abuse of COVID-19 resources like we were talking about just now. These reports were buttressed by the Office of the Auditor General. All right. What became of these reports? Was there any prosecution at all?
Okay, Tendai, I think the issue of the Auditor General's report and the recommendations that she puts forward for different institutions to adopt and implement within their offices, we generally have an issue whereby they are ignored. And it's unfortunate that the Auditor General herself cannot then push the prosecution to prosecute. And the Auditor General's report then needs further investigations for prosecution to take place. And within the abuse of the COVID-19 funds, we saw the former Minister of Health, Mr. Obadiah Moyo, being kicked out of office for criminal abuse of office. Mm-hmm. But then it's unfortunate that at the courts, the state case was found to be defective and therefore he was acquitted. What then that brings us to is the fact that the complexity of corruption is very secretive in nature and it's also very complex in nature. Mm-hmm. So Zimbabwe needs to widen its criminal code crimes which define and which are having the elements of corruption. So, for example, the general section that is used for abuse of office or for corruption is the Section 174, which is criminal abuse of office. Mm-hmm. So now, if the elements of an allegation do not fit within the auspices of Section 174, the chances are high that the case will be acquitted.
It will slip through the cracks.
Yes, unfortunately. So, and another prosecution, which is almost done, was the one for the Drugs International representative, who was, I think, Delish Nguwai. Yes. And unfortunately, the case was just said that the judgment was that it's not a crime to give higher prices for a service. And it was also acquitted, or he was also acquitted. Okay, so from the two mentioned cases of corruption and abuse of the COVID-19 funds, we didn't find the judgments that we would desire.
So in other words, they were not held accountable.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
So from the two examples that we gave of the prosecutions that were about to take place concerning the abuse of COVID-19 funds, they all went scot-free because of the defectiveness of the state case and also the fact that the other one, it's not illegal to then provide an invoice to say my products are going to be provided to government X at this amount.
Right. Okay. So they were not held accountable at all, and that's where it stands. Everyone should accept it.
Yes, unfortunately, apart from being fired from office,
that's as far as it goes.
Yes, the former minister is scot-free.
Now, Zimbabwe has been applauded for its stance on corruption, all right? And what, in your opinion, are some steps and actions that the government must take in their stated zero corruption policy?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. Because as much as the nation has been applauded in fighting corruption, I mean, we've got the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act, which now speaks of unexplained wealth orders. We've got the Business Entities Act, which now speak of beneficial ownership. But unfortunately, there's still some gaps within the laws that we have. One being the fact that the beneficial ownership register is not transparent. I cannot just walk into the register of companies and request to know who the beneficial owners of the companies which are getting contracts to fix the roads, for example, are. And that's a gap within our laws. And also the fact that corruption is very dangerous. If I'm to blow the whistle on corruption, it means that I'm compromising a lot of things, including my security as a person and the security of those that are close to me. So another thing that the government should expedite is the adoption of the whistleblower and witness protection provisions that will encourage citizens to report incidences of corruption and know that at the end of the day I'm protected.
I just want to go back to your first point where you said people don't have access to know who the beneficiaries are. Why is it important to know that?
It's important to know because I think most of the cases that we've been having to do with public procurement contracts, government contracts being given to politically exposed persons. So you want to know that there was a fair competition. Company A did not get a contract on the basis of whom they are linked with in the government of Zimbabwe. An example would be a case which Transparency International Zimbabwe filed with the High Court, whereby we were requesting for the government to give us information on the owner of, or on who the beneficial owners of the company Landela is. And we were questioning the issue of procurement of buses to say, why is the government procuring buses from Belarus at such a high amount when the government, through a third party, when the government can actually just get the buses at a lower price from another service provider or directly from Belarus or China, or wherever the buses are coming from. So the access to information and the opaqueness of the contracts that the government is partaking in using the taxpayers' money.
No, okay.
That's a red light, and that's a cause of concern.
So it's an issue of clarity.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we play a game on this show.
Okay.
It's a blind game. So you ask a question to our next guest, and then in turn, the next guest asks a question to the one after them.
Okay.
They have to answer the question. So our last guest asked this question: is it feasible for a nation to grow its economy independently and without the help of other nations?
Okay, so to respond to your question, to the last guest's question, I think that the reason why countries are put in continents is because of the uniqueness of the people, the uniqueness of the currencies, the uniqueness of also the problems that the continent faces. So we've got the European Union. This is a combination of countries within Europe. And then we've got Africa, and within Africa we've got SADC also. So I think it's impossible for a nation to have to be in isolation or to live in isolation. We need member states, we need neighbors to then strengthen the strategies that we have. We also need neighbors to have issues like best practices and to learn from their challenges, and then we rectify them in Zimbabwe. Even in terms of trade, it's important to have support from different nations.
All right. You can't trade by yourself. You need someone to trade with.
Yes, of course.
All right.
Of course.
Okay. And what's your question to our next guest?
My question to the next guest will be, if we look at Agenda 2063, which is the Africa that we want. With where we are right now, we are in 2022. Do you think that as a nation we are able to achieve the Africa that we want? We say free education for all, free healthcare for all, etc. And also, will we be able to minimize the occurrences of abuse of funds within our African governments?
All right, that is quite an interesting question. It's quite broad and quite involving. I really hope they can tackle it.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much, Fadzai, for joining us. We know you're just coming from making another presentation, so you've got quite a busy day, but you made time for us. We really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me tonight. Thank you, viewers.
Thank you again to our viewers. Thank you for joining us and for being consistent in watching our show. Please join us once again next week.